Every month, a stranger transferred $5,000 to me. This went on for 7 years, and I never knew who he was. But one day, the bank called. "Ma'am, the stranger has transferred $27 million to you and left a message." When I found out... Good day, dear listeners. It's Anna again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I never considered myself a lucky woman. Lucky women married well, drove new cars, and didn't count change at the grocery store checkout while the line behind them grew impatient. I was Sarah Mitchell, 41, divorced, a part-time bookkeeper for a dental practice in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the sole owner of a house that needed a new roof and a water heater that had been making a grinding noise since 2014. My daughter Lily was 12 when all of this began. My son Caleb was 9. Their father, Derek, had relocated to Phoenix with a woman named Brianna, who did Pilates and didn't have stretch marks, and his child support payments arrived with the reliability of a broken clock, right twice a month if I was fortunate. That was my life in October of 2016. Nothing extraordinary, nothing poetic about it. Just the particular exhaustion that accumulates in a woman who's been holding everything together for so long that she can no longer remember what it felt like to let something go. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, the kind of cold, gray October Tuesday that smells like wet leaves and overdue bills, when my phone buzzed with a bank notification. I assumed it was the dental practice's paycheck, deposited 2 days late as usual. I picked up the phone without urgency, but the number on the screen made me set down my coffee mug. Deposit received. $5,000.00. Sender. Private transfer. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I opened the banking app and navigated to the transaction details. There was no name, no memo, no account number visible to me, just the phrase, private wire transfer, and a reference code that meant nothing. I called the bank's after-hours line immediately. The automated system confirmed the deposit was real, cleared, and available. A representative told me that the sender had specifically requested anonymity and that the bank was legally obligated to honor that request. "But someone just sent me $5,000, I said, aware of how absurd that sentence sounded. "Yes, ma'am, that is correct." I waited 3 days for something to happen, for someone to call me and say it was a mistake, for the money to disappear, for a Nigerian prince to email me instructions. Nothing happened. The money sat in my account, still and silent as a stone at the bottom of a lake. So I used it. Lily needed new winter boots. The water heater repair estimate was $340. I paid 2 months ahead on the mortgage because I had never in my adult life paid 2 months ahead on anything, and doing so felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The following month, on the 14th, a Monday, another notification arrived. Deposit received, $5,000.00. Sender, private transfer, same reference format, same anonymity. I called the bank again. They confirmed it was from the same source. No new information. By the 3rd month, I had stopped calling the bank. By the 6th month, I had stopped flinching when the notification appeared. By the end of the 1st year, $5,000 on the 14th of each month had become as reliable as sunrise, more reliable, in fact, than anything else in my life at that time. Who sends a stranger $5,000 every month without explanation? That question lived in me the way a low-grade fever lives in the body, present, persistent, impossible to fully ignore. I told no one. Not my mother in Charlotte, not my best friend Dana, not my sister Karen, who would have immediately insisted I report it to the IRS and the FBI and probably the Pope. I kept it to myself and used the money carefully. The roof in 2017, Caleb's braces in 2018, a modest college savings account for both children starting in 2019, 7 years, 84 months, $420,000 total, arriving like clockwork, reshaping my life in ways I was almost afraid to acknowledge, because acknowledging them felt like pressing on a bruise. And then, on the morning of March 14th, 2024, my phone rang. The number on the screen read, First Carolina Bank Priority Customer Line. That was unusual. I had never received a call from that line before. Ms. Mitchell? A woman's voice, formal and careful. This is Christine Hale from First Carolina Bank. I'm calling because an extraordinary transfer has been made to your account this morning. The amount is $27 million. She paused. And the sender left a message, Ms. Mitchell. He said you would want to know who he was. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, not in a chair, but directly on the floor, because my legs simply stopped working. 7 years. And now, finally, a name. I sat on that kitchen floor for what must have been 20 minutes. Christine Hale from First Carolina Bank waited with professional patience, asking me twice if I was still on the line. I was. I just couldn't speak yet. The message, she told me, had been attached to the wire transfer as a text document. She read it to me slowly, pausing between sentences, as though she understood I would need time to absorb each one. My name is Robert Callaway. You do not know me, but I know you. 12 years ago, on a February night in downtown Raleigh, you stopped on the sidewalk outside Callaway Hardware on Fayetteville Street, my store, though you did not know it, and you gave a man sitting in the cold a cup of coffee, a sandwich from the bag you were carrying, and you sat with him for 11 minutes on a concrete step while the temperature dropped below freezing. You did not take out your phone. You did not look uncomfortable. You simply sat with him. That man was me, was. I had lost my wife 6 months before and had walked out of my own building in a daze, forgetting my coat, forgetting everything. I was not homeless. I was grieving and invisible, and you saw me anyway. I never forgot. I am dying now. Everything I have left, I am leaving with you. The lawyers will contact you. Robert. I remembered that night. Of course I remembered it. Not because I thought anything of it at the time, but because the man had seemed so utterly lost that I'd felt a physical pull toward him. The way you feel a pull toward a child who has dropped their ice cream on the sidewalk. He had salt and pepper hair. He'd thanked me in a voice that cracked on the second syllable. I had thought about him for a few days afterward, wondered vaguely if he was all right, and then life had carried me forward the way life does. That man had been Robert Callaway, the owner of Callaway Hardware, a regional chain with 14 locations across North Carolina and Virginia, which I later learned had been sold to a national retailer in 2021 for a sum that the business press described as substantial. He had no surviving spouse. His estate, after taxes and charitable bequests specified in his will, included the $27 million now sitting in my account. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at the wall. And then the fear arrived. Not the small, manageable fear of a bounced check or a missed deadline, but the large, cold, structural fear of a woman who suddenly understands that her life has changed in a way she cannot undo, because $27 million is not a windfall. It is a target. It is a declaration. It is the kind of number that makes people behave in ways they wouldn't otherwise behave. I thought of Lily, who is now 19 and in her first year at UNC Chapel Hill. I thought of Caleb, 17, quiet and methodical, who wanted to study engineering. I thought of the roof I had finally replaced, the mortgage I had finally paid off 6 months ago with the accumulated savings. I had built something careful and small and mine. And now this. The lawyers contacted me the following morning, a firm out of Greensboro, Harmon, Bass, and Whitfield. A man named Gerald Bass spoke to me in the measured tones of a professional who has delivered large sums of money to surprise people before. He confirmed the transfer. He confirmed the will. He told me that Robert Callaway had updated his estate documents 18 months prior, following his terminal cancer diagnosis, and that the bequest to me was unambiguous, witnessed, and ironclad. "Are there other heirs?" I asked. There was a brief pause that told me everything before Gerald Bass said a word. "Mr. Callaway had 2 adult children from his first marriage," he said carefully. "A daughter, Victoria Callaway Reed, and a son, Marcus Callaway. They were informed of the estate distribution last week, as required by law." "And how did they react?" Another pause. "Ms. Mitchell, I would strongly recommend retaining your own legal counsel before speaking with anyone connected to the Callaway family." I hung up and sat with that sentence for a long time. Before speaking with anyone connected to the Callaway family. Not a casual recommendation, a warning dressed in polite language. I went to my laptop and typed the names. Victoria Callaway Reed, 44, a former real estate developer in Charlotte, currently involved in 2 pending civil suits over a failed condominium project. Marcus Callaway, 41, lived in Greensboro, had reportedly been estranged from his father for at least 8 years, according to a brief mention in a 2019 local business profile of Robert. Children who had been estranged from a dying father who chose to leave $27 million to a stranger who had once given him a sandwich. How angry would that make you? Be honest with yourself. How absolutely incandescent with rage would that make you? I knew then, sitting at my kitchen table in Raleigh staring at photographs of people I had never met, that this was not over. This was barely the beginning, and I had 2 choices. I could be frightened and passive and hope that good legal documents would protect me, or I could be deliberate. I could be strategic. I could build something they couldn't dismantle. I opened a new document on my laptop and I started to plan. The first item on the list was the name Gerald Bass had recommended. Find your own attorney. Today. I found her through Dana, my best friend, who had gone through a brutal custody dispute 4 years earlier and emerged from it with the calm, battle-tested expression of a woman who had learned exactly which lawyers in Raleigh fought to win. Her name was Patricia Okafor, a partner at a small civil litigation firm on Glenwood Avenue, a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the kind of deliberate stillness that made you believe she had already considered every scenario before you finished describing your problem. I sat in her office on a Friday afternoon and laid everything out on the table. The 7 years of transfers, the call from the bank, Robert's letter, the Callaway children, Gerald Bass's warning. Patricia listened without interrupting. She made 3 notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me directly. "The will is valid," she said. Robert Callaway had full legal capacity at the time of signing, 2 independent witnesses, and a notary. His estate attorneys filed everything correctly. A contest based on capacity will fail. She paused. However, Victoria and Marcus Callaway will almost certainly file a contest regardless. not because they expect to win, because litigation is expensive and exhausting, and they may be calculating that you'll settle to make it stop. "I won't," I said. Patricia looked at me for a moment. "Good," she said simply, and wrote something else on the pad. She filed a formal response to the estate on my behalf that same week, establishing my legal claim and signaling to the Callaway family's attorneys that I was represented and prepared. Within 48 hours, I received the first phone call. It came to my personal cell phone, a number I had not given to anyone connected to the estate. The caller ID showed a Charlotte area code. When I answered, the voice was smooth, calibrated, and immediately familiar in the way that certain voices are familiar because you recognize the type before you know the person. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Victoria Callaway Reed. I hope I'm not disturbing you." She was disturbing me enormously, but I said nothing. "I just wanted to reach out personally," Victoria continued, "because I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I believe reasonable people can resolve this without turning it into something ugly." Her voice had the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to negotiating from a position of assumed superiority. My father was ill. He wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. We have documentation that suggests his judgment was compromised. I'm sure you understand. This is a family matter. "I understand that your father made a legal decision about his own estate," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. A small pause. "Ms. Mitchell, we're prepared to offer you a settlement, something fair, something that acknowledges your relationship with my father without—" "You should direct any further communication to my attorney," I said. "Patricia Okafor. Her office number is on the public record." I ended the call. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down, but not from fear, from something closer to recognition. Victoria had called my personal number, which meant she had accessed it from somewhere. A background check, a data broker, perhaps something less legal. That was the first thing that told me who I was dealing with. The second thing came 3 days later, and it was the piece of evidence that changed everything. Patricia called me on a Wednesday morning, her voice carrying the particular restrained energy of someone who has just found exactly what they were looking for. She had hired a private investigator, a standard precaution, she explained, in contested estate cases, and the investigator had been looking into the Callaway siblings' financial records as they pertained to the estate. What he found was this. 8 months before Robert's death, Victoria and Marcus had jointly petitioned a probate court in Guilford County to have their father declared mentally incompetent and to have themselves appointed as his legal guardians. Robert had fought the petition with his own attorneys. He had undergone 3 independent psychiatric evaluations. All 3 evaluators found him fully competent. The petition had been denied. They tried to take control of his finances before he died, I said slowly. They tried and failed, Patricia confirmed. And the timing matters. Robert updated his will to include you 4 months after that petition was denied. The attorneys at Harmon, Bass, and Whitfield have confirmed this sequence. It is our belief that Robert specifically chose to accelerate your bequest and structure it the way he did because he knew his children would contest it. He was protecting the gift. I sat with that for a long, quiet moment. Robert Callaway had known what his children were. He had seen it clearly, the way a man who has built a business from the ground up learns to read the character of the people around him. And in the last year of his life, facing a terminal diagnosis and a failed guardianship attempt by the 2 people who should have been caring for him, he had thought back across 12 years to a cold February night and a woman on a concrete step. He had trusted me, a stranger, because I had been kind without calculation, without expecting anything in return. And his children, the people who had tried to strip him of his autonomy while he was still alive, were now going to court to strip me of his final gift. I thought about that for a long time that night, standing at the kitchen window while the March dark settled over the neighborhood. Was I angry? Yes. But beneath the anger was something quieter and more durable. I was ready. Patricia's strategy was methodical and, she explained to me, deliberately public in certain key respects. When people operate in the open, she told me during our second meeting, it becomes much harder for the other side to apply pressure without it looking like exactly what it is. The first move was filing a comprehensive response to the Callaway's estate contest in Wake County Probate Court, attaching the psychiatric evaluation records, which were public court documents, establishing that Robert had been found fully competent not once but 3 times by independent professionals. Patricia attached a timeline: the failed guardianship petition in August, the psychiatric evaluations in September and October, the updated will in December, Robert's death in January 2024. The document told a story without requiring a single editorial comment. The story was clear. The second move was a letter sent from Patricia's firm to the Callaway's attorney, David Fenwick of Fenwick and Pryor in Charlotte, formally requesting all communications between Victoria, Marcus, and their father's estate managers going back 3 years. This was a standard discovery request, but the timing of it, arriving the same week as our court filing, was intended to signal something. We know where to look. I was not in the courtroom for the filing. I was in my kitchen in Raleigh making Caleb's lunch before school, living my life as deliberately normally as I could manage, because I had learned that the greatest source of stability during crisis is routine. But Patricia called me at noon to confirm everything had been submitted. How did Fenwick respond? I asked. He asked for a 60-day extension on discovery, she said. I denied it. I felt something that was close to satisfaction. Close, but not quite. Because I had learned by then not to feel satisfied too early. I was right to be cautious. The escalation came on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the court filing. I was in the parking lot of a grocery store in North Raleigh, loading bags into my car, when a black SUV pulled into the spot beside mine. The passenger window rolled down. Marcus Callaway was sitting in the passenger seat. I had seen his photograph enough times by then to recognize him immediately. Heavy set, 50-ish, with the particular expression of a man who has spent a lifetime expecting the world to rearrange itself for his convenience. You should think carefully about what you're doing, he said. His voice was low, not quite threatening in a way I could record and play back to prove anything. My father was not a well man. You took advantage of a grieving, confused elderly person, and a jury is going to see that. Your father was found competent by 3 psychiatrists, I said. I was proud of how level my voice was. Juries don't read psychiatric reports. Juries see a stranger who showed up and walked away with $27 million. He let that sit for a moment. There's a settlement offer on the table. $2 million. Clean. No publicity. He paused again. Think about your kids, Ms. Mitchell. Think about how complicated things can get. That last sentence, think about your kids, was the sentence that sealed it. Not because I believed he would harm my children. I didn't think he would go that far, and that wasn't the kind of family they were. But because he had said it deliberately, knowing it would land, using my love for my children as a lever. That was who Marcus Callaway was. That was the full picture. Move your car, I said. or I will call the police and report this as intimidation, with your license plate number and the time and location on record." He stared at me for a moment. Then the window rolled up and the SUV backed out. I sat in my car for 5 minutes before driving home. My hands were steady on the wheel. But when I got inside, I locked the front door, activated the security camera app on my phone, and called Patricia. She listened to everything, asked 3 specific questions about what had been said, and told me to write it all down in a dated document and email it to her that night for her records. "Is there anything actually illegal in what he said?" I asked. "Borderline," she said. "But the pattern of behavior, the personal phone call from Victoria, now this, that pattern matters. We document everything." After I hung up, I went to Caleb's room. He was at his desk, headphones on, working through a calculus problem set. I stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at him. He didn't know any of this was happening. Lily was at college. They were both safe. They were both fine. I decided that weekend I would go nowhere and do nothing. I took Caleb to his soccer game on Saturday morning and stood on the sideline in the cold April air and cheered and clapped and drank bad coffee from a thermos. On Sunday, I drove to Charlotte and had lunch with my mother at her kitchen table and didn't say a word about any of it. Just ate her chicken soup and listened to her talk about her garden and let the normalcy of it hold me up. I needed those 2 days because what was coming next required everything I had. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, a Greensboro area code, on a Monday morning 10 days after the parking lot encounter with Marcus. The woman on the line introduced herself as Diane Ashworth, and she described herself as a conflict resolution specialist retained by the Callaway family. I knew immediately what this was, not mediation in any legitimate sense. There was ongoing litigation. Formal mediation would have gone through the court. This was a private approach, soft and plausible sounding, designed to bypass Patricia and get me alone in a conversation where I might say something they could use or agree to something I couldn't easily undo. "I appreciate the call," I said pleasantly. "Please contact my attorney, Patricia Okafor. She handles all estate matters." "I completely understand," Diane Ashworth said, her voice warm and faintly sympathetic, the voice of a woman paid to sound like she's on your side. "I just want to mention, this process is going to be very public. Court documents become part of the public record. Details about your finances, your relationship with Mr. Callaway, how you met, all of that becomes available. I imagine you'd prefer to protect your privacy, your children's privacy." There it was again, the children. "I'll let my attorney know you called," I said, and hung up. I didn't feel rattled. I recognized in some clear part of myself that the very fact that they were making these approaches meant that their legal position was weaker than they wanted me to believe. People with strong cases go to court. People with weak cases try to get you to settle before you understand how strong your position is. I filed a note about the call in my running document, sent it to Patricia, and made myself a second cup of coffee. But I was alone in that house, and I want to be honest about what that felt like. The legal position was solid. The evidence was solid. Patricia was exceptional. And yet there is a particular loneliness in fighting something large by yourself in a kitchen in North Carolina, not wanting to alarm your children, not wanting to worry your elderly mother. The aloneness of it had weight. I called Dana that afternoon. We had been friends since the Lily and Caleb in diapers years, since the neighborhood playgroup era when our children were small and our marriages were still intact, and we gathered in each other's kitchens and talked about everything. Dana had been through her own version of this. Not money, but a custody fight that had stripped her bare and rebuilt her into someone harder and more precise. She knew what it felt like to be a woman standing in the middle of something that other people were trying to decide for her. I told her everything, all of it. Robert's letter, the Callaways, the parking lot, the conflict resolution specialist. She listened without interrupting, the way she always had, and when I finished there was a pause, and then she said, "Sarah, you are not going to lose this." "I know," I said, and I did know. But knowing and feeling are different rooms in the same house, and I'd been locked out of the second one for weeks. "Do you need me to come over?" she asked. "No," I said. "I just needed someone else to know." She came over anyway 40 minutes later with wine and a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, and we sat at my kitchen table until midnight. She didn't offer advice or strategies or action items. She just sat there across from me, and that was enough. That was, honestly, more than enough. Her presence reminded me of something important, something I had known intellectually but had not felt until that evening. I was not starting from nothing. I had built a real life. I had people. I had children who were flourishing. I had a home I owned outright. I had 7 years of careful, sensible decisions behind me, and $27 million in front of me, and a lawyer who I would trust with my life. Victoria Callaway Reed had a failed real estate project and 2 pending civil suits. Marcus Callaway had been estranged from his dying father for 8 years. I poured a second glass of wine and thought about that contrast for a moment. And somewhere in Greensboro and Charlotte, I knew they were watching me, waiting for me to crack, to settle, to disappear quietly. Their attorney was almost certainly advising them that their case was not strong, while billing them generously for the privilege of that advice. Their conflict resolution specialist had reported back that I was unresponsive. Their parking lot intimidation had produced nothing but a dated email in Patricia's files. They were watching, but I was not moving. 6 weeks after the parking lot encounter, in early May, I received a handwritten note in the mail. It was on cream-colored stationery, the kind that signals that the writer has spent money specifically to look like someone who doesn't need to try. The handwriting was large and looping. The note was from Victoria. "Sarah, I wonder if we might simply meet for coffee, as women, as human beings, not as lawyers, not as adversaries. My father was a complicated man, and I think we both deserve to understand each other better. Please consider it. Victoria Callaway Reed." I photographed the note, sent it to Patricia, and then, against Patricia's mild professional reluctance, and with her full knowledge and preparation, I said yes. I want to be clear about why. Not because I trusted Victoria, not because I believed for a moment that this was genuine. I said yes because I wanted to look at her directly, because I had been a piece on this board that other people were moving, and I wanted to sit across from the person who had tried to strip Robert of his legal personhood while he was still alive, and I wanted to see who she was with my own eyes. We met at a coffee shop in Cary on a Thursday afternoon. Neutral territory, public, well-lit. Victoria arrived 3 minutes after I did, which told me she had been watching for my arrival. She was tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of groomed, composed appearance that takes significant daily effort to maintain. She smiled when she saw me, a smile calibrated to warmth, and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I mean that." We ordered coffee. For the first 5 minutes, she talked about her father, about his stubbornness, his difficulty showing affection, the ways his grief over his late wife had changed him. She was good. She wove just enough real emotion into it to make it feel authentic, the grief of a daughter talking about a complicated father. She was performing for me, but she was a skilled performer. He became very susceptible toward the end, she said finally, setting down her cup. Lonely people are. They latch on to kindness. They misinterpret connection. She looked at me with an expression that was designed to read as sympathetic. I don't blame you, Sarah. I want you to know that. I don't believe you set out to manipulate him. There it was, the accusation dressed in absolution. I met your father once, I said. I gave him a sandwich and sat with him on a step for 11 minutes. He was in a fragile state for years after my mother died, Victoria said smoothly. He wasn't thinking clearly. A jury will... Your father was evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists, I said. All 3 found him fully competent. Your guardianship petition was denied. That's documented public record. Something shifted in Victoria's face, so briefly that you might have missed it if you weren't watching carefully. A tightening around the eyes, a compression of the lips. We all interpret these things differently, she said, and her voice had changed by a fraction of a degree. I think your attorney has told you that the contest is unlikely to succeed, I said. I think you're here because you hoped I would be easier to manage in person than on paper. The warmth disappeared completely then. Victoria set down her coffee cup with a precision that was its own kind of anger. You are making a serious mistake, she said. Her voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if she had raised it. You don't understand what we're capable of. We will make this so expensive and so public and so drawn out that you will spend the next 4 years of your life in legal proceedings. We will depose everyone you know. We will put your finances under a microscope. We will question every decision you've made since the money started arriving. Is that what you want? For your children to watch their mother dragged through a public court battle? I looked at her across the table. I thought about Robert sitting on a concrete step in February, coat forgotten, grief hollowed, invisible to everyone who walked past him. I thought about this woman, his daughter, trying to have him declared incompetent so she could control his money before he died. Victoria, I said calmly, you and your brother attempted to strip your father of his legal rights while he was dying. He fought you. 3 doctors said he was competent. He then specifically chose to leave his estate to someone outside your family. That story, told in a courtroom, is not going to make either of you look like grieving children who were robbed. It's going to make you look exactly like what you are. She stood up. Her chair scraped back and several people at nearby tables glanced over. We'll see each other in court, she said. Yes, I said. We will. She left. I sat for a moment finishing my coffee, and the fear that moved through me afterward was real. I won't pretend otherwise. She was not wrong that litigation was expensive and exhausting. She was not wrong that they could make things difficult. But the fear had a quality to it that surprised me. It was fuel. Every threat they made told me exactly how much they needed me to back down, and I was not going to back down. I paid for both coffees and drove home. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd week of June in Wake County Probate Court, a contest hearing. The Callaway's formal challenge to Robert's will, specifically the bequest to me. Patricia had told me from the beginning that the case was strong and the contest was weak, but she had also told me, in her precise and unsentimental way, that the hearing itself would be uncomfortable. Expect them to paint you as an opportunist, she said. Expect emotional testimony. Prepare yourself for that. I prepared myself. What none of us had fully anticipated, though Patricia had suspected it, was what David Fenwick, the Callaway's attorney, would try to do in the 48 hours before the hearing. He filed a last-minute motion to introduce new evidence, a series of alleged financial transactions that he claimed demonstrated a pattern of contact between me and Robert Callaway prior to the official transfer records. The implication was that I had known who Robert was, had cultivated a relationship with him deliberately, and had in some way engineered the bequest. It was a fabrication, and it was a sloppy one. Patricia had the motion dismissed within 6 hours, presenting communication records from Robert's own estate attorneys, confirming that Robert had specifically instructed them never to disclose his identity to me. She also presented the investigator's report, which included time-stamped data on every interaction Robert had initiated, all of them unilateral, all of them anonymous. Every single one of them directed from him to me, and never the reverse. Robert had found me. Robert had found my bank account. Robert had chosen every step of this. The morning of the hearing, I wore a navy blazer and a pair of low heels and drove myself to the courthouse on my own. Patricia met me on the steps. She looked at me in that evaluating way she had, as if running a quick checklist. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected from television. Wood-paneled, quiet, fluorescent lit. Victoria and Marcus sat at the opposing table with David Fenwick between them. Victoria had, I noticed, also chosen navy, a coincidence that felt deeply appropriate for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. Marcus was staring at the table. What I want to describe is not the legal arguments. Patricia presented those, methodically, with a precision that was almost beautiful in its completeness. But the moment when the Callaway siblings' own testimony began to unravel them. David Fenwick made a strategic error that Patricia had anticipated. He called Marcus to the stand to testify about Robert's declining mental state. Marcus had been coached, clearly, but coaching only goes so far when the questions turn toward documented fact. "Mr. Callaway," Patricia said, approaching the stand with her yellow legal pad, "you testified that your father was mentally incompetent in the final years of his life. When is the last time you visited your father in person?" A pause. "We spoke regularly on the phone." "When is the last time you visited him in person?" Another pause. 2016, approximately. 8 years before his death, Patricia said. "You did not visit your father in person in the last 8 years of his life. Is that correct?" Marcus's jaw tightened. Our relationship was complicated. "During that same period," Patricia continued, "your sister Victoria petitioned the court to have your father declared mentally incompetent. You co-signed that petition. The court denied it. After the denial, neither you nor your sister appears in any of your father's estate documents, financial records, or medical records as a contact or a visitor." She paused. "You had no involvement in your father's daily life for the last 8 years, and yet you are here today claiming authority over his final decisions. Help me understand that." David Fenwick objected. The judge allowed the question. Marcus looked at his sister. Victoria's expression had the fixed quality of a person concentrating very hard on appearing composed. "He wasn't thinking clearly," Marcus said. "According to 3 independent psychiatric evaluators, he was," Patricia said. "What is the basis for your contrary assessment, given that you had not seen him in 8 years?" The silence that followed was approximately 7 seconds long. I know because I counted. The judge, a methodical, gray-haired woman named the Honorable Diane Prewitt, asked David Fenwick if his clients had any additional evidence supporting a claim of incapacity beyond testimony. Fenwick consulted his notes. He mentioned the attempted last-minute financial records motion, which had been dismissed. He mentioned a claim that Robert had been isolated in his final years, which Patricia immediately countered with records showing that Robert had continued to manage his business affairs, meet with his estate attorneys, and donate regularly to 3 charities, all with full legal competence until 6 weeks before his death. Judge Prewitt looked at both tables. I had not been called to testify. Patricia had decided the document spoke clearly enough without it, and she was right. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my navy blazer, and I was very still. The stillness was not performance. It was the authentic stillness of a woman who had done everything she could and now had to let the work speak. "I'm prepared to rule," Judge Prewitt said. Victoria turned and looked at me across the courtroom. Her expression, just for a moment before she composed it again, was the expression of someone who has just understood that what they expected to happen is not going to happen. I held her gaze and said nothing. Judge Prewitt's ruling was delivered in 12 minutes, which Patricia later told me was unusually decisive for a contested estate hearing. The contest was denied in its entirety. The evidence of Robert Callaway's mental competency was, in the judge's words, extensive, consistent, and unimpeachable. The guardianship petition, filed by the same parties now contesting the will, had been denied by a separate court on the same grounds. The timeline of Robert's decisions, including the bequest to me, demonstrated a pattern of deliberate, informed, and legally sound estate planning. There was no evidence of undue influence. There was no evidence of fraud. There was no evidence of a pattern of contact as the last-minute motion had alleged, and that motion had been dismissed for lack of substantiation. The $27 million was mine. Judge Prewitt also made an additional note, not binding but significant, that the conduct of the contesting parties in filing a last-minute motion based on fabricated financial records would be referred to the State Bar's disciplinary committee for review of David Fenwick's professional conduct. Patricia turned to me and allowed herself briefly a small and genuine smile. I pressed my hands flat on the table to keep them steady. Outside the courthouse in the June heat, we stood on the steps and Patricia gave me the concise version of what would happen next. The estate would complete its distribution within 60 days. The funds already in my account would be confirmed as clear of any legal claim. And if the Callaways attempted any further legal action, we would be prepared to countersue for the costs of defending against a frivolous contest. "Will they try again?" I asked. "Unlikely," she said. "They've spent significantly on this already. Fenwick's malpractice exposure on that last-minute filing creates its own problems for them. And they know now that everything they try to use against you is going to be countered with documentation." She looked at me steadily. "You built a very clean record, Sarah. From the beginning. You kept notes, you reported contacts, you never responded informally to anything. That discipline won this." I thought about the parking lot at the grocery store, Marcus leaning out of the black SUV window. I thought about Victoria's handwritten note on cream stationery. I thought about the 7 years of $5,000 deposits that I had used carefully and honestly, living within my means, not pretending the money was something other than what it was, something unknown, something I wanted to be worthy of. Maybe that was, in the end, what Robert had seen in me. Not cleverness, not beauty, not luck, just the ability to receive something with honesty. I drove home to Raleigh in the afternoon heat. I called Lily first. She was between classes at UNC eating lunch on the quad, and she screamed when I told her the ruling, and a group of students near her apparently turned to look. Then I called Caleb, who said, "That's incredible, Mom," with the precise and quiet emphasis of a 17-year-old who doesn't know how to show you that something has moved him, but is moved. Then I called Dana and didn't say anything for about 4 seconds, and she said, "You won," without my having to say a word, because she knew the sound of me. That evening, I sat alone in my kitchen. The house was quiet. Through the window, the June light was going gold and slow over the yard. I thought about Robert Callaway, a man I had spent 11 minutes with on a concrete step, a man whose face I had largely forgotten until I looked it up on the internet, a man who had carried the memory of a small kindness for 12 years and chosen, in the last months of his life, to make it matter. I said thank you to the empty room. It felt necessary. 2 weeks after the ruling, David Fenwick's firm quietly notified Patricia that the Callaways would not be pursuing any further action. The formal letter was terse, legally correct, and entirely lacking in grace, which, by that point, surprised me not at all. And then, almost without ceremony, it was over. The first thing I did with the money, the first deliberate, chosen thing, not the money that had simply been sitting there waiting for the legal process to resolve, was nothing. For 30 days after the ruling, I did nothing different. I continued driving to the dental practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I continued making Caleb's lunch. I continued doing the things I had always done, because I had learned across 7 years of anonymous deposits that money changes the conditions of your life, not the core of it, and I needed the core of mine to remain intact. Then I started slowly. I hired a financial advisor, a fee-only fiduciary, a woman named Carmen Reyes who had been recommended by Patricia, who came to my house rather than asking me to come to some glass office, and who spent our first meeting asking me what I valued before she asked me anything about investment strategy. I trusted her immediately and completely. With Carmen's guidance, I established trusts for Lily and Caleb, structured to fund their education and give them a meaningful foundation without the particular damage that attaches to receiving large sums of money too young and without context. I endowed a scholarship at the community college where I had taken bookkeeping courses after my divorce, a scholarship for single parents returning to the workforce, which felt like the truest possible use I could imagine. I bought, finally, a house I actually loved, a white craftsman bungalow in a neighborhood of old trees and wide porches, 3 miles from where I'd lived before. I took Lily and Caleb to Portugal for 2 weeks in August and watched my daughter eat pastel de nata on a Lisbon terrace and laugh at something her brother said, and felt a fullness in my chest that had no word precise enough for it. I retired from the dental practice in the fall, not with drama, but with 2 months' notice, a warm going-away lunch, and a genuine feeling of gratitude for every single ordinary Tuesday and Thursday. That job had given me something to do when I desperately needed something to do. I started volunteering twice a week at a homeless outreach organization downtown. This was not a coincidence. I had thought about Robert on that step, Robert invisible in the February cold, and I understood viscerally now what it cost a person to be unseen. I wanted to be on those sidewalks. I wanted to be the person who stopped. That was my life, and it was, to be honest, the quietest and most contented version of itself I had ever known. Victoria Callaway Reed's life, in the same period, proceeded along a rather different trajectory. The 2 pending civil suits over her failed condominium project concluded within the following year. She lost both, and the combined judgment against her exceeded her liquid assets by a margin that required her to sell a property in Charlotte. David Fenwick's disciplinary review resulted in a formal censure from the state bar, not disbarment, but a mark on his professional record that followed him. His firm lost 2 significant clients in the months following the ruling. Marcus I heard less about. He had relocated to Florida sometime in the fall. A mutual connection, a peripheral acquaintance of Dana's who moved in Greensboro business circles, mentioned offhandedly that Marcus had been involved in a failed investment in a restaurant group that had collapsed. I did not seek out this information. It arrived the way certain kinds of information do, incidentally, without invitation, and I received it without satisfaction and without grief. I didn't hate Victoria and Marcus Callaway. I want to be careful about that. I had watched them sit across from me in that courtroom and attempt, one last time, to take something that wasn't theirs, and what I had felt was not hatred, but something colder and more definitive. The recognition that there are people who travel through life treating everything as something to acquire, and who are baffled and enraged when the world occasionally refuses to cooperate. They had treated their father that way. They had treated me that way. The world had, in both instances, refused to cooperate. Lily finished her undergraduate degree and was accepted into a graduate program in environmental policy. Caleb enrolled in mechanical engineering at NC State and built a small autonomous vehicle prototype in his second semester that his professor called unusually elegant. Dana got promoted at the architecture firm where she worked and bought herself a convertible she had been wanting for 15 years. My mother turned 80, and we had a party on her back porch in Charlotte with 27 of her friends, and she wore a yellow dress and danced to Motown in the fading afternoon light. These were the facts of my life, ordinary and specific and irreplaceable. One afternoon in the spring, 2 years after the ruling, I drove past the block on Fayetteville Street, where Robert had been sitting that February night. The hardware store was different now. It had become a coffee shop with exposed brick and pendant lighting. I parked and went inside and ordered a coffee and sat near the window for a while, looking at the sidewalk. I thought about kindness, about how small it looks when you're doing it, how absolutely unremarkable, and how large it turns out to be. 11 minutes on a concrete step. That's all it had been. That is my story. What would you have done in my place? I genuinely want to know. Leave me a comment below. Thank you for being here with me.